Hi, Mick McQuaid here. Welcome to Lecture 01 of iste422 Fall 2015. Before I begin, I just want to point out two things about my lectures. First, I intend to stick as closely as possible to the lecture notes that you see on the display in front of you. Second, I intend to, in addition, do Google items that I see on the items that I share with you on the in the lecture, and I do this instead of giving you URLs. I think that the pervasive problem of link rot suggests that you should, as you read, Google concepts that you don't know about, sometimes even Google concepts that you do know about. And so I intend to do this while I'm delivering the lecture. So enough of that, let's begin. So my introduction is to say that in January I read a story on Hacker News, which by the way you should certainly Google. Let's just interrupt for a moment to do that. And it's it's news.y. Well, actually let me just Google, follow my own advice here and say Google Hacker News. And here I get to news.ycombinator.com. And I suggest that you look at Hacker News at least every week, if not every day, in your job. I think it's kind of mandatory reading. So I read a story on Hacker News about IBM laying off a quarter of its workforce, which was the largest layoff, which was purported at that moment to be the largest layoff in history. And one reason given in two of the follow-up articles that I read about the layoffs was that IBM has not transitioned to the cloud. And our discussion of the chaos report on the very first day of class, and your assignment related to the chaos report on the very first day of class, needs to acknowledge that software development as practiced by Google, Amazon, and other major cloud players cannot be practiced by many customer ignorant failures that litter IT history. Google and Amazon can, whether they do or not is another question, but they can monitor every bit of customers' use of their software. They can update and improve anything and everything without customer interaction. Now, there are obviously limitations to this, so the improvements might change behavior that customers depend upon, and there are also limitations based on conflicting customer needs. When you operate at the scale of Google or Amazon, many customers want exactly what many other customers do not want. Now, at the same time, I'd like to report an anecdote of a leading firm in the RFID industry. So they recently abandoned the cloud and took their operations back in-house. And I was fortunate to meet and speak with the CIO of this company. And it convinced me that their problem was that the cloud contract, which was for 2 years, was written on terms that were unfavorable to them. And they could not anticipate the manner in which the terms were unfavorable. The cloud is new. They just did not understand the cloud contract. And you may not either. You may not understand your cloud contract either. These are very smart guys. They're at the top of their own industry. And their cloud vendor, when apprised that they weren't happy, did not find it profitable to improve service to the level that they needed. And I have a great deal of detail I could go into on that, but essentially the important point that I want to make right now as an introductory point is that they parted company at the conclusion of the 2-year contract and took their operations back in-house and decided that either they weren't ready for the cloud or the cloud wasn't ready for them. Now, one of the most, before I continue here, let me just point out that this is just a typical PDF viewing application. Pretty much any PDF viewing application, whether on Mac, which I'm using here, PC, Android, iOS, whatever operating system you're on, will offer to let you see the table of contents of a document. And these lecture notes are lengthy enough, in fact, they'll be available to you as a book. They're lengthy enough that you need this table of contents. You can't really navigate this without the table of contents. So let's just expand this portion of the table of contents here and see what things I'm going to talk about in this introduction. And you can see that first I'm going to talk about this assertion that it is easier to write than to read, second about the chaos report, third about the chaos report survey results, and fourth some things about our classroom. So this assertion, it is easier to write than to read, is a very interesting assertion, one of the most interesting assertions that I've ever read that motivates the study of application development practices, which is the name of our course. Joel Spolsky popularized this claim, and let's just Google Joel Spolsky's name because you may not know his name, although I'm sure you know his work. I'm just going to Joel Spolsky here. And you can see that I have another tab open here with Joel on software, which was his blog. He sort of gave up on this blog in 2013, and he talks about giving up on the blog at some point here. And it's well worth reading. His old blog entries, even blog entries in this blog that are like 10 years old, are still relevant today, still worth reading. He's a very influential and popular writer, as well as a co-founder of Stack Overflow and Trello and various other popular projects. Anyway, he made this claim in that Joel on Software blog and some books based on it. And oh, I guess I just said what I say here. He's among the most loquacious of all successful software developers. He's partly responsible for Stack Overflow, Trello, and so on. And he used to write prolifically at Joel on Software, but the pace has slowed to like maybe one post per year in recent years. And some of the most popular posts are available in book form. I have some of the books in my office if you want to just glance at them. But there's no single sentence that he ever wrote, I think, that deserves more attention than this, that it is easier to write than to read. Now, if we measure software development by time and money, it is commonly asserted that maintenance is half of all software effort. Maintenance requires reading, either of unreadable code written by somebody else or even unreadable code you wrote. And if you don't believe me when I say that your code is unreadable, take a look at anything you wrote more than a year ago. And if that doesn't convince you, you may be in denial. It's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. Time expended reading and struggling to understand drives up the time that programmers have to spend to conduct maintenance activities, as opposed to new development activities. And there are many obstacles to reading. Obstacles to reading include practices in forming variable names, approaches to modularizing, deciphering thought processes, differences stemming from writers' experience level and, of course, readers' experience level, and commenting and the absence of commenting. And these issues will hover around many of the topics that we will cover in this course. Now, you're required to read a document in my courses called the Chaos Report. And the very first thing that I noticed about it when I read it was that it's 20 years old. That didn't inspire a lot of confidence in me. On the other hand, as I read through it, I saw that the issues in the lists on pages 4, 5, and 8 would be similar today, 20 years later. It actually does have many points to make that are timeless. Now, the introductory quote to it, which is from the novel The Sum of All Fears, I think is taken out of context, and I kind of take exception to people using quotations spuriously. We often find that famous things that famous people said were not meant the way that they're popularized. So I looked this up. This is a popular I don't know what you call it, suspense novel, military novel, and found out that the character who utters this is making the point that the Roman bridges are over-engineered and that some of them are still standing to this day. And he goes on to say that you have to over-engineer if you don't have the opportunity to test. He says that refinements like using less stone in the bridges or using less labor can come only from practice. I think that's a very interesting elaboration of that quote, much more interesting than the quote itself. Now, the Chaos Report survey results. So the Chaos Report includes these survey results. More companies reported cost overruns of 21% to 50% than any other category. And taken together, the cost overruns of 21% to 100% accounted for about 2/3 of the studied projects. More companies reported time overruns of 100 to 200% than any other category, and taken together, the time overruns of 51 to 200% accounted for 2/3 of all the studied projects. The top success factors reported were user involvement, executive management support, clear statement of requirements, proper planning, and realistic expectations. All difficult things to achieve, all difficult things to achieve. The top challenged factors reported, and challenged, of course, is a euphemism for failure, were lack of user input, incomplete requirements and specs, changing requirements and specs, lack of executive support, and technology incompetence. And all of these are pervasive even today. The top impaired factors reported were incomplete requirements, lack of user involvement, lack of resources, unrealistic expectations, and lack of executive support. Again, pervasive today. The top case study success factors reported were user involvement, executive management support, clear statement of requirements, proper planning, and realistic expectations. The same things that you will see in a typical case study. So that's all I want to say about that. Now I have to say some rather unpleasant things, and I don't like to say these, and they're not for everybody. Most students, I think, do well, but I have been repeatedly warned that for the few students who won't, I have to make this kind of statement right up front. So this course is meant to change how you think about application development. So you will get nothing at all out of it if you don't show up to class. This course is meant to support you in improving your personal practice, so you will get nothing at all out of it if you don't listen to what other people say. You don't know what kinds of projects you'll work on in the future. You may think you do, but you don't. You must share your experiences, and you must respect the experiences that are shared with you. I will make it difficult for people who miss too many classes to obtain a passing grade. And please remember the preceding sentence and don't try to negotiate your way out of it. Simply attend so that you're not put in the uncomfortable position of trying to negotiate your way out of it. Also bear in mind that if you're absent and it's not your fault, you're still absent. You simply need to attend to pass. If you cannot pass because of reasons beyond your control, that does not mean that I should give you a passing grade. You must actually master the material to pass. The best that you can hope for if you do not attend is to withdraw before the deadline. Although you will receive some slack, and don't ask me how much, don't use that slack lightly. If you're absent a few times because you think it won't matter, and then suddenly you find yourself in an emergency that forces you to be absent further, you may regret the absences that you took that you did not need. Okay, and as you can see, I'm up to the end of this first part, and the next lecture will be baseline setting.